Good morning. Apparently democracy is a very sexy topic and we have a full house. So thank you for coming. We're here this morning to talk about democracy in a very different style format, in a non-Forum 2000 style format, in something called the Unconference. So the idea is to have a town hall style discussion and debate, and the speakers, or the participants, are you, everyone in the audience. So if you came here expecting a top-down style prescriptive panel, this is not it. How this format will run is we have two themes in today's Unconference section, a first question and a second question. We begin the first question with two short inputs from our thought leaders who are sitting amongst you in the audience. And then after these inputs, we go on and pass on the microphone to you guys. There is one caveat. There's a clock. You have 2 minutes for your inputs and a few seconds of discretion time after that. I'm also terribly sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Reshaping, and this is my colleague Irena Kalasova. And welcome again. So Irena, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Rishab. We will have, as was mentioned, we will have two sub-teams during this panel. And I'm going to introduce the first one. The first one is, does Greta exaggerate? I'm not going to introduce Greta, because most of you probably already heard about her. I'm going to read a short statement by Greta, which probably, if she wasn't famous till then, she became famous after this statement. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be standing here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all came to me for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I am one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? This was said on September 23rd, 2019 at the UN summit. After this speech, as you know, Greta was called or described in various words. She was described as an abused, brainwashed child. She was described as a sick child, complicated adolescent, a person who did not see much of life, and therefore she has no right to tell us what to do. Christopher Caldwell, who is a commentator for the New York Times, asked the question, or actually accused Greta of sowing panic. So we are going to discuss it in this panel, which is mostly on democracy, but of course, Greta was a girl who motivated a huge movement which is called Fridays for Future, which is a movement mostly by primary school and high school children who are protesting against the destruction of the planet. And some people say that, this is a grassroots movement, it's not democratic, it's more a lobby group, and that it's not actually able to go through the regular channels of politics. And this is one of the things which they criticize. And yes, that it's sowing panic. So we are going to talk about this. And as a first speaker, I have Lucie Smolková, who is actually Czech representative of the movement Fridays for Future. And my question is to you, Lucie, does Greta exaggerate?
Okay, this is a weird mic. Well, it really depends from what point of view you are trying to judge this. On the UN Climate Summit, where she said this speech, I heard it, I watched it live. I would say it's important to understand that she was talking to the entire world. She wasn't talking specifically to us, Europeans. And judging it from a European point of view, yes, I would say it was a little bit too much, and I wouldn't bring it in here. I wouldn't say it like this in here in European context, because it's really like fractioning the discussion. But hey, she was talking also to people who are from islands, who are like sinking, who lost like 20–30% of their ground and all their history and everything. They are very scared. They don't know what's gonna happen, what's coming. And to these people, I think she spoke out of soul. So this is one point. And the other is, who are we to judge it? And why are we stopping the whole discussion on Greta's emotions? That's not the important thing. The movement's way larger, and the core of what she's saying is very true. Hey, there's a problem, and we need to talk about it, we need to face it, we need to be looking for ways how to solve it. And it doesn't matter with what emotions, what judgments people are trying to damage this message. This is the core of the movement and of Greta.
Our next speaker, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Asha Ahmed Mwilu from Nairobi. She's a journalist. She's a very brave journalist because she deals with questions like corruption and organized crime. So you are coming from Africa, another region, or if we can talk Africa about as a region which is highly affected by the global warming. So what's your input on Greta and her message?
I mean, I think that Greta definitely does not exaggerate because the facts are on the table. I'm really curious to know how the world leaders would have responded if this was a young boy talking about climate change. I think we can't ignore the patriarchy and sexism and the role that that has played in how world leaders have reacted to Greta. But I think global movements, especially on climate change, have always had these figures who spearhead the conversation and narrative, and Greta is one of them. The question for people like us is, how do we take it forward? How do we take what she started and that momentum to include people who haven't been having these conversations? For example, she's mentioned Africa, small islands are the most diversely affected by climate change, yet these countries are largely absent in these conversations. So how do we amplify what Greta is saying? Because one of her speeches in Davos, she said rightfully so, that this is a house burning, and react the way you would react if your house was burning. Run and react. In Africa, in small islands, that's exactly what we need to do.
Okay, so these are the introductory remarks. Thank you very much. And now we are opening the floor, and we would like to hear more, about your impressions from Greta. But it's not about her, really. It's more about the message she's trying to convey, and also the way how she's trying to convey the message, and to what extent you think that the movement she started, or she motivated, she inspired, to what extent this is the way how to make politicians act. To what extent this pressure, this huge pressure from young people, and I think that we can say that really, I mean, her message is well received globally, which is a very unique thing, that this is something people can relate to, especially young people, of course, because they will be affected the most. So to what extent you think that's the way to go? That's maybe the way how to make democracy sexy again, because suddenly people are involved. Young people who are very often somehow passive in the democratic process became very much involved, which I think is one of the great things about this whole movement. So what do you think about that? What's your impression? What's your feeling? And please don't be shy. You don't have to be shy. This is your moment. You can share your views, so we can have a good debate. And of course, especially since I see in the audience very many young people. So please, especially you, if you can tell us, how do you feel, how do you relate to this whole movement, to Greta?
Do we have a volunteer? Are you willing to channel your inner Greta?
We have two young gentlemen here as volunteers, so this is great. So the gentleman in the front row and then in the second row.
Jaroslav Angel, we had an interesting exchange or dialogue in the previous panel between Alexander Vondra and Lucie Smolkova. And the main argument was about emotions and reason. And I find it really curious that people who criticize Greta for being too emotional for two reasons. First, she's pointing out to science, and science is kind of epitome of reason, right? And second point is that in modern cognitive science, this division or dichotomy between emotions and reasons is actually now seen by leading cognitive scientists as obsolete. They recognize emotions as part of cognition. Because what we learn is really guided by our emotions, passions. Now, we have to be more sophisticated. We have to think about what kind of emotions, right? So these are two of my comments and points. Thank you.
Just if you can pass the microphone. Thank you.
Now, it's true I'm not a young person, but I would give hope to the young people in the sense that wait for 20 years and then all the old ones will have died. So I would say objection to what is going on will die. So that's my first one. Second, I love Greta very much. And in fact, I want to express my thanks to His Holiness this morning, because he used a word once that was never used over the past days, and that's the word love. Okay. Because I believe that science, first of all, I don't believe in science. Okay, so science is human, by definition subjective, and interpretable. So for the scientists among you, I don't believe in science. But love and emotion in what is going on is very important. Love for the planet, love for the other human being, which is a very important part of democracy. So I think Greta gets the right emotions up, because it will talk about greed, talk about love. So, and I think she gets the momentum, because already by people going against her is going in her favor. It creates the momentum for change, because I believe we need radical change, and we are still too much talking in a conservative way, try to keep what we have. So, but to be honest, humanity will disappear if we try to keep what we have.
Just gonna toss it. All right, let's see a catch. Oh.
Okay, I have just pointed to this, to, let's say, emotion versus reason, because I don't think that's even like a good way to put it, because it shouldn't be like emotions against reason. It should be somehow cooperation of those two. And I, in a way, also understand the arguments of our opponents that sometimes too many emotions could be not constructive, and that's true. And I see it in the movement that sometimes they put it like we against the others, the enemies, and that's not helpful for anything. These emotions, I would say, like not well processed emotions, are really good for nothing. But when we talk about climate change, when we are looking around and seeing what's going on in the world, how can we not have emotions? Hey, we are humans, we have emotions, but we have to learn how to deal with them, how to calm our minds, and then bring the reason and find ways how to change something. But it definitely shouldn't be and cannot be reason, science against emotions, no. And please, let's try not putting it this way. Yeah, that's it.
Some very interesting points, and I'm going to pass it on to you, sir. But Asha, you also said this. Doesn't Greta then challenge the inherent patriarchy in the system? And isn't democracy in some ways a patriarchal system? So just putting that out there.
I have more like an example of the debate and the division of young and bit older generation. I was traveling with my brother, who is 19 years old, in Ukraine. Sorry, we went to some peak in the mountains, and we wanted to take water. He didn't want to buy plastic bottle because he wanted to save the water, and he was saying, yeah, there should be spring up there so we can have like the water. I said no, because like it's not sure, so I will buy the plastic bottle. In the end, what happened was that we didn't have enough water, so we had to share, and I was like a bit angry that I told him, yeah, we should buy it, and he was, no, I don't want to buy it because I want to do the right thing for the climate. And I think this is very kind of interesting and illustrative how we need to take the issue seriously and important, but how this change can impact some people who will have to share resources or give up on some way of life and being in opposition to the movement or to the even discussing the climate change, which is needed. I am absolutely for it. But this made me thinking like how to overcome this division, and actually I don't know. I just wanted to share this. Thanks.
Just next to you.
Hello. Well, I have just one small point. How to make democracy sexy again? Well, the main basis of democracy is to raise your voice and to be heard. But no one is listening. If you want to make democracy sexy again for young people, try to listen.
When you say no one is listening, you mean whom? Elites? Politicians?
I think the politicians see us still as a children. Of course, young people are still a bit children, but we have a different point of view made by the world we are growing up. And this is creating a different point of view. We are looking at the world, and we can see the disastrous elements of today's world. And we realize that in 20, 30, 40 years, it will have the huge impact on our lives and lives of our children. But the elites, the politicians, they still think that these changes are not so fast, so strong. But we can see it during our short lives, 20, 25, 40, 30 years. We could see the huge, enormous changes, but no one is listening us. No one is listening that we can see the disastrous changes.
Okay, there's a gentleman.
Peter Hedbavny, Prague. Thank you very much. I'd like to add to what you have said. No one is listening. In English, you have a beautiful collocation, echo chambers. Yesterday, we heard about Facebook being the most successful company measured by the stock market development. Let's put it together. Does Facebook help people listening to each other? Does it help save our time? Is it kind of a habit? Maybe yes. Is it difficult to overcome this habit? Yes. Does it lead us to, social media in general, but I use Facebook to be super brief. Does it help us to really voice our opinions? Is it a little bit like the Chinese system of people self-censoring themselves of the fear of being videotaped and their thoughts being kept track of? Isn't the way forward to just have a critical mass of intellectuals who just say being on social media is the worst thing the human mind you can think of, and let's consider it. Yeah, because if we are in the golden age forever, cage, not age, maybe we will be trapped there forever. So if we want to revive democracy, let's say honestly, do we have to have the social media in our phone? Maybe not. More questions than answers, but I'll be happy to hear some answers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, if I can have a short response, I think we shouldn't completely switch our focus. I mean, Facebook is part of the problem or maybe of the solution, but you know, we shouldn't just limit now our discussion on social media, even though, of course, it's a huge topic. But yeah, thank you for your.
Yeah, to wrap it up, because humans don't focus on a very long time. The short is, if we want to help democracy, let's avoid echo chambers. Let's avoid social media. Thank you.
Well, starting from detoxing from social media every now and then would be a good start. I'm Arsen Karacan from Armenia. I want to go a little bit above the philosophical discussion about democracy to actual on the ground, maybe state level issues. We just had the biggest democratic change since the Soviet Union collapsed, and what we are witnessing is often basically playing geopolitics rather than supporting a young democracy. And this is what I want to bring up. And it is about what if we're going to have double standards when it comes to supporting this democracy or the other democracy. That's where we're losing. When we have a democratic change at birth, and the countries, the unions, the larger organizations, international organizations are not supporting this process enough, then you feel betrayed from the democratic community. And then you end up going backwards and thinking, well, it's all realpolitik. It is not about the vote of the people. It is not about the positive transformation. It is not about nonviolence anymore. So I think going after models, current models, at times when democracy is in crisis all over the world, you have small democratic processes or big changes that can become success stories. My goal personally here is to come and say, hey guys, I want to be heard. I come from Armenia. We are a young democracy. Help us, support us, make us a success model, and let's go promote changes like this. Because unless we do that, unless we support our own democratic communities on state level, on community level, on organizational level, we're not going to move forward. Thank you.
This side is very silent. I mean, if you have something to say, just raise your hand. Yes.
Yeah, I just had a little remark about the fact that we say that nobody is listening. I think that when it comes to stating the problems, most people are listening. But then, what about the solutions? Because we are all asking the politicians to listen to us. But what are we willing to accept? What solutions are we willing them to implement? Do we want them to implement austerity measure and prevent everyone from taking planes or making us reduce our consumptions? Do you really want to impose on people to abandon their way of lives? Or what do we want them to do exactly? Like, what are the solutions that we are putting on the table?
Yeah, and I think that's actually, this will have to go through democratic processes, this kind of discussion. What should we do? How should we implement? I'm sorry, I have to just first pass it here, and then you will get.
Thank you very much. Martin Poliacik is my name. I'm from Slovakia. I've been an active politician for the last 10 years, a lecturer of the critical thinking for the last almost 20 years. And one thing I'm missing here is to stop looking outwards all the time and start looking inwards, because what's really happening is, what I see as a teacher and a lecturer and a politician as well, is that people are getting frustrated because of the changes. And the changes that are happening so fast that they are less and less capable of adhering, of the flexibility to wake up to a different world every morning that they went to bed to the day before. And I think we all know that democracy starts in that sentence is in almost every constitution, which says the power always comes from the people. And if people are not actually, aware that it is them who need to change first to make the change happen outwards, people will stop listening and people will start talking, and maybe everyone will talk in the same time and everyone will listen in the same time, and that's what social networks are about. It's not true that people are not listening. We are listening 12 to 14 hours a day to all kinds of, you know, chaos and really rubbish over there. We are sitting in a place like this and we accept if someone says he does not believe in science in silence. You know, this is unacceptable. Science is not to be believed in, it's to be respected. We're not here, you know, to say that we can trust or believe in anything we want to. That's not true. You know, there are facts out there, and if you're asking if Greta is exaggerating, no, she's not. We should exaggerate to create the emotion, but exactly what was said before, to point at the science, at the facts, because people have been talking about climate change and decrease of democracy for the last 30 years. And people have not been listening because
I'm sorry to interrupt. You're
emotion was not there.
Time. You're 30 seconds over time.
So,
Last comment.
So my only point is we need to switch from looking outwards to look inwards, because the only change that can happen is change in every human being that is here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the point of the 30 years and the point about solutions, which I totally agree with. I find a lot of this discussion very frustrating because there's no solution. With Greta, with Extinction Rebellion, I agree with the objective. What do they propose we do about it? I don't think Extinction Rebellion is going to solve it with carbon neutral by 2025. It won't happen. Anyone who heard my question in the last session will know that I'm concerned that there's a failure of global governance. It's a global tragedy of the commons. And what we need to do is make more effective and accountable global governance. Just for example, on carbon. Let us say we introduce globally a $10 a tonne carbon tax next year, escalated at $10 a tonne for the next decade, enforced it globally. I really think we'd have a massive impact on the carbon problem using the invisible hand of the market to work its magic. So in terms of how one can do this, there's a detailed proposal. I've no time to go into it. There's a detailed proposal to create a parliamentary assembly at the United Nations. It's not some totally left field proposal that won't work. It has support from the European Parliament, from the Pan-African Parliament, from the Latin American Parliament. So I'd be very interested to hear people's views on what they think about making global governance more effective and more accountable.
Right, which in the era of Trump and Brexit is a million-dollar question, right? Where is the global governance?
But the planet, I mean, one gets this political reality all the time about Russia and China and Trump.
Right.
The planet doesn't care.
So we have gentlemen back there and here and this side. I mean, guys, at least, okay, perfect. I mean, you know, usually the right is quite vocal, so I am surprised that this time the right is completely silent. Yes, please.
So, it's Edoardo from Italy, and I would like to react to the MP's speech. You are an MP, right? Yes. And no, just, I do believe that there is a part of the political arena which is listening, and we don't complain about it. We complain about the fact that there is not actual space for choice. So I don't like the dichotomy of reason and emotions. At the end of the day, there is no real space for anything which is a global and holistic approach to changing climate issues, which involves also promoting more progressive taxation, new ideas, postmodern ideas of living in cities or rural areas, or even contesting the way advertising plays a role in our life and commodify our identities and free time. And so even if people are listening to us, I don't really see the space in which they're accepting new radical policies in order to change the lives and spaces we are living. So it's some sort of passive listening, at least for the majority of politicians. And this is what I think most affect us as parts of social movements, which can be Friday for Future, which can be as well Rethinking Economics or other movements which are trying to contest the way our actual time is proposed to be lived.
So we have time for 2 more interventions. So affirmative actions, I will first pass the mic on the right side, and then we will go to you, and then we will have some concluding remarks. So there was a gentleman, yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to take 2 points explained the last one and the previous one, in the sense that the last one said that there is no choice, if I have well understood, and the previous one said that it could be better to look inwards instead of outwards. Well, I tried now to make a point, to enlarge with another point into a political participation. I come from a country, Catalonia, in which you have seen probably all of you images of yesterday. We have in a sense, the same situation, in the sense that we have not the choice to decide our future. And that's why we are here representing an organization, Asamblea Nacional Catalana, who has 100,000 people from all over Catalonia, from all ages, from all social strata, and we are struggling for Catalan independence. But in reality, I would like to come again to the point, is that I think we are now putting in practice a way of political participation. We are, in a sense, trying to let the voice heard to a national community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there are 2 hands on this side. So because really we need to move to another topic. So if I can ask you to limit your intervention to 1 minute.
Sure.
Perfect. And then gentleman in the back.
I am John Keane. I'm from Australia, which you may know gave birth for the first time to a Green Party, but also has a Prime Minister who so loves coal that he actually brought a chunk of coal into Parliament to plead with the people that they should love coal. On Greta Thunberg and democracy, 2 things have not so far been said. One is hope. Hope is really important in this period, and it's important for democracy. There was a time when Greta said publicly that we should not hope. She has actually changed her language because she sees that hope is not optimism and it's not pessimism. It's somehow in between. Hope is wishing for a better future, but based upon practical, pragmatic potentials. Democracy needs hope, and her objection, I would say, to optimism is that this is foolishness. But pessimism, the problem with pessimism is that pessimists are dogmatists. They know everything, they know the future. She's appealing to hope. The second thing, very briefly, is it's not often recognized that democracy as an ideal is the most anthropocentric political ideal that humans ever invented. What could be more anthropocentric than the belief that the people, without any restraints, no tyrants, no monarchs, could behave on earth, governing themselves as they wish? What I think is going on, and Greta Thunberg feeds this, is a greening of democracy that never happened before in its history. So democracy comes to mean, thanks to rewilding schemes and constitutional recognition of environment, climate strikes, democracy comes to mean the self-government of flesh and blood people who recognize their inner and fundamental dependence upon the biomes in which they live, and in which those biomes have the right of representation in human affairs. There's a kind of democratization of our relationship with the non-human. And I think Greta Thunberg has made a very substantial contribution to that democratization of democracy.
Hello, my name is Eldar Valiyev. I'm from Azerbaijan,
And really briefly, I've seen in the program of this panel that there's going to be also addressed if a democracy can survive without capitalism. And we actually haven't touched upon that.
Yeah, it's the
my
next
point
topic.
is,
So
my point is that we are right now living here in the central of Europe, or coming from capitalistic countries. And 15 cargo ships produce more in a year than all cars in the world. And what we have here is capitalism. So for the young, I'm not the young generation probably anymore, I'm more middle-aged. Maybe we can start making changes by just reducing some of our consumerism. Not buying car every 5 years, not buying new suits, and so on. Maybe by starting this policy, we already will be doing some changes that Greta is talking about. Because one thing is to demand something from politicians, but we know that we are in a global world where corporations that over states, national states, are ruling the world. So I'm sitting on your left, so probably my views are a little bit leftist, but
no,
that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you for this bridge to our next topic. We will get there in a minute. And we will talk about the personal responsibility, but also the responsibility of the system. But before we go there, I would like to ask Sasha Hanik, I don't know where she, oh, here she is, to have like concluding remarks on the first part of our debate. So just please wait for the mic.
Hi, so I'm just going to rephrase, and I think this conversation raises more questions than solutions or conclusions, doesn't it? So I have 4 points. The first one is we cannot deny that the climate, I'm only speaking about climate discussion. The climate discussion is a discussion about facts and feeling, both of them. And I agree with what was said about which feelings are the best ones in order to pursue solutions. So the second thing I would like to add is, are we really looking at solutions yet? Because solutions aren't proposals. Solutions are, in my opinion, agreements and proposals that are being taken in by people. The second thing I want to say is words matter. And a lot has been said here about speeches and the words we use, and whether the tone of Greta is aggressive, whether it is logical, whether it's pessimist or hopeful. What I have heard here, what I think is that we have to move forward into not into characters, not into if Greta is the best role model for this movement, if the Friday Future is the best example of a movement, but what will be the tone of our speech and the words we will use in order to convince people. This is a very important matter that we have to address immediately. And finally, I would like to raise this question. Is this climate movement something unique, or is it part of a greater movement, a greater discussion? Because it's something that identifies young people, isn't it? But I think it's part of something else. It's part of something that the young people is taking on account, and it's part of something that will be a priority in the next year's discussions. I have just 30 seconds more, I think, so I would like to thank all of you for your interventions. I think what was said here was very important. I enjoyed the discussion a lot. And what I would like to keep in mind is which feelings are we feeding? Which feelings are we raising? Because this is not a discussion about Greta. This is a discussion about something much bigger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to move to our next topic, which after this discussion, maybe we can rephrase if the planet can survive with capitalism, but we will probably stick to the original one if democracy can survive with capitalism. And I will pass the floor to Rishab.
Thank you. We had some interesting points, and I think this is actually a good segue into our next section, which is about can democracy survive without capitalism. As a corollary, I'm going to put out there, can capitalism survive without democracy? And can democracy survive climate change? To get us moving, we have two gentlemen. I'm going to start with Dan Shiftan, Israeli intellectual, and I hope you will be at your provocative best, sir, and set us off on that topic. And we need the mic for you.
Well, the original topic I was asked to speak about is how can we make democracy sexy again? I didn't like the title very much, but I think it can help us to discuss something that is fundamental and important. Namely, all democracies, look at them all over the world, are in crisis. And one of the major reasons has to do with this sexy business. In other words, instead of asking ourselves what is good, we are asking ourselves what looks good, what sounds good, what is sexy, what is attractive. And I think we must go back to asking ourselves what is the right thing to do, what will produce the results in the final analysis, and most important for anything else in terms of democracy, what will bring back the trust of the people in the democratic system, because this is what is being undermined. The trust of the people in the democratic system, because we are focusing on what looks good and not on what is good. Let me give you three interesting examples. First of all, we all like transparency. It's very good that people can know what is happening. It is a catastrophe, because too much transparency, and this is where we are today, produces a situation where nobody talks to the subject because everybody talks to the protocol. Nobody cares what will happen with the issue because everybody cares about the question, does it look good, does it sound good, and the result is that we deal with issues that are of today and tomorrow and not next year and next generation. So transparency up to a point is good. We have reached a point where it is counterproductive in terms of democracy, because when people don't speak to the subject and don't improve the situation, then people don't trust politicians and don't trust the democratic system. The second example is people want to be compassionate because this looks good. So you want to be compassionate, you want to show everybody that you love everybody, and then you bring millions of refugees into Europe, and the inevitable result is that the people tell you, we don't want it, and they vote for right-wing parties, and then they vote for fascism. So if you go in one extreme too far, you're bringing the other extreme because people have lost their trust in you willing to work for their benefit. That's the second example. The third example, we heard something yesterday. Let us bring everybody in, whatever democracy wants, whatever the people want, without limitations. Is it important to be inclusive? Yes. Do you want to include everybody? No, but it looks good. Let me give you an example. If we all want to go to dinner, one likes meat and the other fish, and the other is vegetarian, and somebody wants halal and somebody wants kosher, that's fine. What happens when a cannibal comes and says, I want to join you for dinner? I would like to know if I'm on the guest list or on the menu. So I will tell people, wait a minute, there is a limit. I will not let you use the systems of democracy in order to destroy democracy because it looks good. So if something looks good, be careful. Very often, whatever looks good is bad. When somebody calls me on the phone and says, you won, I immediately know it's crooked, it's tricky. I'm hanging up because I know if I didn't work for it, I will not win anything. What do I advocate? I advocate coming back to the middle. In other words, employ common sense. give credibility to leaders. If we look at the great leaders of our time, they would not be elected today. An FDR would not be elected. A Churchill, a Roosevelt, a de Gaulle, a Ben-Gurion, these people would not be elected today because they don't look good, because they were committed to something real. So let's go back to what made democracy an enormous success, defeated the Soviet Union, and the moment we hear somebody telling us something that we like, let's be very suspicious about it. I think that's a good time to give you back the mic.
Thank you. Spoken like a true centrist there. My next speaker, John Keane, author and democratic thinker. Your response, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I too had prepared to talk about making democracy sexy again. And I just wanted to say a couple of things. My grandmother would be very upset if she knew that I was sitting here talking about sex and sexiness. That was a topic that was strictly banned at the meal table. It's also worth saying, you may not know, but in the history of democracy, she is typically represented as a woman. That's true for the famous Stele in Athens, all through its history, until actually today in Hong Kong, democracy is always a woman, and mostly in its history, democracy was despised, feared, because as a woman, it meant passions, and it meant kind of frenziness, it meant the mob. And that view was expressed well into the 1930s. For example, the Baltimore wit H.L. Mencken wrote that democracy is like an orgasm. You know, the people get aroused and a demagogue appears, and then, you know, something happens and everybody sort of calms down. That kind of language, I think, is strange and ought to be set aside. But I do think, slightly in tension with the last contributor, I do think if democracy means, if sexy means exciting, appealing, hot, careful of the gendering, democracy does need the carnivalesque, it does need fun. You know, it does need a president of the most powerful democracy to do a mic drop at the National Press Club. Obama did that. Or it does need, you know, music initiatives like Rock Against Racism. It does need Hong Kong orchestra, you know, dressed in hard hats and gas masks, playing Glory to Hong Kong. And I've had experiences of arrest, near arrest, where, you know, democracy is certainly exciting. That's one thing. About capitalism, I would say that, I want to say four things, but the big thought is, I see I've only got 20 seconds. How do I do this in 20 seconds? I'll do it very quickly. I think the history of modern capitalism and democracy shows that democracy cannot live without markets and capitalism, but it can't live with capitalism. That dilemma, I think, remains ours. The attempt to abolish capitalism, the Soviet model, was a catastrophic failure. But neoliberalism, which unchains capitalism, deregulation, privatization of everything, produces devastating effects on democracy. And very quickly, what I wanted to say, I see I've now got a minute and a few seconds. Very quickly, four things. Once upon a time, and very often, it's still said by Francis Fukuyama, for instance, that if there is no bourgeois, if there's no middle class, there can be no democracy. And the argument is that if you look at European history, you see that the middle classes not only valued private property and thrift and sometimes music and literature and so on, but they also valued representative government as a protection against predatory power of monarchy. The second thing to say is that if you look around the world, that thesis, Barrington Moore wrote it, no bourgeois, no democracy, doesn't apply to Russia, China, Saudi, Turkey, the middle classes, which are very often entangled with a system of state capitalism, the middle classes are dependent upon state power and spending. And the consequence is that they're promiscuous when it comes to democracy. They have no particular love of democracy. Indeed, they prefer to go shopping. If you take Erdogan, that in 20 years, the number of shopping malls has increased by 8 times in Turkey. This is bad environmentally, but it's also bad for democracy. The third thing, quickly, I wanted to say is that it seems to me, when thinking about the relationship of capitalism and democracy in our times, the most dangerous thing about capitalism is its financialization. If there are now very good histories of this that show that we are living in a very unusual period in which banking and credit institutions control always, in every democracy, more than 90% of the money supply. But worse than that, they engage in risky...
John, so you're 3 minutes over, so...
Experiments. I'm sorry. And the control of that financial sector, which produces busts and deeply damaging effects of democracy, I think remains a very central issue. And one last thought. I do think that predatory capitalism is destructive of democracy. We are back to a problem that haunted the whole of the 19th and early 20th centuries, which is how to restrain commodity production exchange, to protect biospheres and to protect people, just as children were protected against wage labor and people were protected against unlimited days at work. So populations now need protecting for the sake of democracy. Thank you very much.
I wasn't trying to approach you in a predatory manner, but we have a first point. There you go, sir.
Hello. Well, I want to talk about listening because I think that the world is listening what is happening, but the really thing that we need to know is the world needs to understand what is really happening in the world. For example, I'm come from Venezuela. It's a country that we have a dictatorship, and if I tell you all the things that is happening in my country, maybe you will listen everything what I'm going to say. But if I explain you what are we living, for example, 5 million people left our country, and that looks like a high cipher, and it's a lot of people. But if I make you understand how does it feel when you have to say bye to your friends, when you have to look around and see a country that the people is starving. What do you think if I tell you that in 2016, the student movement went to the streets to fight for democracy and we were repressed? But the really thing is that our friends were killed. We have to wake our friends from the street when they were dead. And sometimes we are talking about the emotion that the speech make us feel, and I think that is true. We have to choose the right emotions, because if not, we are gonna make the people hate. But I understand also the desperation of someone that want to make the world to understand how they feel inside, how are the real things that are happening in the places where they have to live and express all the suffering that they have. Maybe the world needs to understand not what is democracy, but what they will lose when they don't have democracy. And I can assure you that all the countries that we live in dictatorships, or the people that we don't have democracy, we can make you understand and express better how is to live like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Armand Kless is my name. I think...
So can you hold the mic closer to you?
One could ask the question about the future society in terms, how can we move towards what one may call a decent society? And then the question is, what would that entail? I think it would entail, above all, a new ethics which would require an absolute respect for all forms of sentient life. We still live, we call ourselves a civilization, but we live in a barbarian world and society. As long as we will kill, torture, eat animals, there will be no civilization and no ethical society. And as long as we kill animals, we will kill humans. So, second very brief point, I think if somebody else, I don't know if somebody else will address it, I can only point to it, is transhumanism. Are we moving beyond man, enhancing man first, humans, and then moving beyond? First, hybrid beings, half man, half machine, and that would perhaps lead to a different, very different and unfortunate kind of society, a semi-totalitarian, perhaps later a totally totalitarian society, because machines comply, and semi-machines too. And my last point, very briefly, is on capitalism. Capitalism, I have a very different approach from anybody at this conference, since I'm kind of considered a leftist anarchist. So capitalism, we must be aware of this. This is not a statement of value, it's objective. It's based on it's biologically what I'm saying, biological. It's based on the destructive drives, on greed, egoism, envy, vanity, domination, search, lust for domination. But then alternatives, I don't have time, I'm not a speaker here, go into this. But in any case, capitalism will exploit humans, animals, and nature to total exhaustion. And that's perhaps the biggest threat. So it's not just climate. The threat is much more global, vast, and comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna go there. There's a lady there who had her hand up. Please, can we get that back? I want to go across the room. Okay, clearly not. So.
Hello, I'm Graham Henderson. I just wanted to make a point about capitalism and democracy. Ancient Athens, which we always take as an example, is not an obvious or straightforward example of a capitalist society at all. As many people will know, citizenship in ancient Athens was a responsibility and a duty which was undertaken by all male citizens of a polis. They were not paid other than a stipend for their food and their daily allowance for their participation. It was a civic duty. The people who designed the Parthenon in Athens were not paid to design the Parthenon. They did it in their role as citizens of the city. It was more like an anarchist collective, if you like, than anything else. Now, of course, this economy was supported by slave labor and by the suppression of women. So it's not a model to follow in the modern world. However, we live in a world where digital technology is rapidly eroding jobs, is rapidly removing jobs, and we're asking questions about what people can do. I think ancient Athens comes back into its own at that point, because you think of a universal basic income which releases people to be full citizens, to make take their full responsibility in a democratic state, and to contribute their time, talent, and energies to society rather than to the economy. And I think this is one of the ways we can renovate democracy, by looking back at that example and saying, this is how we can free human energies for the better of humanity, using democracy to do so.
So going back in time. Thank you. I'm going to go across the room there, and then I'll come back to you in a second. Actually, you've had your hand up for a while, so as well.
I just want to say in one sentence what you all need to remember. Democracy is like a garden. You have to continue to weed it forever, because the problems will always come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Catch. So.
Hi, I am here because of Katla Institute that fights for democracy and human rights for the Latin American countries. I am from Mexico, and I think the discussion about democracy is very different from the point of view of the developed countries than from the point of view of the developing countries. Mexico, as a country that has a democracy, I think that the most important subjects we need to talk about for democracies in Latin American countries that don't have solid institutions, that don't have a functional division of power. I think that the most important thing is education and eliminating corruption and impunity. I think education is a pillar needed for democracy to work, because in Latin American countries such as Mexico, we don't have good education for all people. Only people that can pay for private education have good education. The rest have very poor education because it is more a political subject than a real worry to educate people. And I think it is fundamental because if you don't have education, people won't know what they have to lose if they lose democracy. And there are some people that, because they don't have education, when they grow up, they don't have opportunities. And as they don't have opportunities, they don't have good living standards. And as they don't have good living standards, when some populists want to take power, they feel like they don't have anything to lose. Because with democratic leaders and with democratic institutions, they haven't got anything and any benefits from the system. So I think that is fundamental, so people can have better education, so they can have better opportunities, so they can have better living standards, so they trust democracy and democratic institutions. And I also think that...
Sorry, you're 30 seconds over time. I think
sorry.
pass it on. Could you please keep an eye on the clock when you pass it on to the next person as well?
Yeah.
Can I go on?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm from Armenia, involved in environmental movements and especially anti-mining movements. So I think it's, we speak a lot about the authoritarianism as something that doesn't allow democracy to work, or we have to fight against. But there are also other parallel institutions, for example, connected to corporate world and financial capitalism, which are really a big threat to democracy. For example, now we are facing a situation where, based on bilateral investment agreements between countries, investors from mainly developed world countries can take the state to the court and demand very high compensations for not getting profits. For those who do not know, I would really suggest reading about investment state dispute courts. So basically, it's happening more and more around the world that, for example, one of the cases was that Philip Morris was suing the government, I don't remember which one, probably Australia, if I'm not mistaken, because they did a campaign against smoking, and it means that Philip Morris was not able to get as much profit as expected. Or in one of the countries, they sued the government and got millions of dollars of compensation because the drinking water providing private company polluted the drinking water, and the municipality just stopped the contract with this company. But they went to the investment court, and they could prove that they didn't get enough, didn't get profit, so the state and the people had to compensate. So now there is a similar situation in Armenia. We want to stop a mining project which has a high risk of contamination of water resources and other environmental effects and human rights things. And so again, the company threatens to sue in international courts. So for me, it's important also to speak about these corporate parallel institutions, these ISDS and some other systems which are really a big threat, first of all, to the developing world, but also basically to all the democracies, all the countries in the world.
We're going to come back here after you finish, sir,
Yeah.
so please.
Thank you. I want to talk about two different concepts of democracy, two different words. Before democracy world and after democracy world. Before democracy discourse and after democracy discourse. I am coming from Iran. When you talk in UK, in USA, and in Europe, when you talk about democracy, normally you talk about after democracy world. You talk about details, not about basic value in democracy. You talk normally about how you can go to better democracy. But in some countries, say, like to Iran, when we talk about democracy, this concept is different. We talk about basic value. For example, we have an election, and supreme leader in Iran always says, during 35 years ago, after revolution, we had a 35 election. We have a good democracy in the Middle East. But I think democracy is not number. When we talk about democracy, we talk about quality. For example, in my country, president normally elect by people, and he can appoint foreign minister as a one member of cabinet. But when you see our situation in Iran, we have, for example, 4 or 5 main issues. Every day, I am journalist, every day we are in the top story in Reuters, AP, AFP, about challenge with Saudi, challenge with USA, nuclear deal, and something. In my country, president and foreign minister, they can't decision about these issues. Normally, these issues are under control by supreme leader and revolutionary guard. And they are not representative by, they are not elected by people. And supreme leader and revolutionary guard, they can control anything in country without any vote by people. They don't need to vote by people, but we have a democracy. Be careful, when we talk about democracy, we have a 2 different words. Before democracy world and after democracy world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go across the room and try and channel some of that hope that you were referring to, that greater vote to the discourse, and maybe we can take the next 20 minutes of the conversation towards solutions or how to make democracy sexy again. So if anyone has ideas on how, or to try and be a little more hopeful, let's see if we can get there.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Ifcha, and I would like to relate to some of your contributions and hopefully as well to point out some kind of solutions. I come from Parallel Police, what is a special organization which you, if you will like what I will say, you can all Google it, and I made some of the notes. What is the, I think the strongest word which we, or value which we connect with democracy, it's a freedom, right? We all feel that we are free when we are in democracy, but are we really like aware of the relation between to be freedom and to be responsible for your freedom? What actually means to be responsible for your actions, and thus do the democracies which we have now in the world teach us how to be responsible, and actually do they allow us to be responsible for our actions? And as well there is like relation of the to the banks and to the all centralization. So I think that we could nowadays we could look for more for the tools which can be used nowadays to allow us to be responsible for what we do, and with these tools we can create like a kind of new culture, because the world has changed, and the globalization and the people which are moving, immigrants and expats or whatever, it's actually as well a fact. it's a fact which is here, part of our world. So we need to look more for the tools, and then we will create a culture and a platform for the new democracy, and we will be more related to the democracy and will trust more. I would like to give, for example, one example of decentralized technology. What is a crypto? Well, I guess that you all have heard about the Bitcoin. I don't know how deeply, but one example, I would like to mention one name, was Amir Taki. Amir Taki is known as a hacker. He was listed on a list of 30 most dangerous people on the internet, actually just because he was pointing out the way of the surveillance of the central power. And nowadays he is in Syria, he's Bitcoin developer. What actually means that he work on a tool which is used by Kurds to create their own, the new culture, the new community, new setup, and to like survive and be free. Well, that's all.
Thank you. Thank
Maybe
you.
if I may have one additional question or some kind of a idea for thoughts. It's a little bit a follow-up question to the question on Facebook. Elizabeth Warren, who is the Democratic candidate for the president in the US, came up with an agenda, anti-Facebook agenda. She basically claims that Facebook is destroying democracy, that it's too big, it's too powerful, nobody controls it, and it's spreading lies. It's a main hotbed for fake news. And she simply says it's too big and we need to break it to little pieces. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that, you know, it's like intervention of a state against free enterprise? What do you think?
Yusuf has the mic, and I think that's a good point, because I know you did a lot of your work on the Arab Spring, and Facebook and Twitter played a big role in that. So maybe you can try and bring in some of that perspective.
Yeah, but it's not directly a response to your question. I'm still in the mood of finding solutions, and I just had two in mind. One, I'm Yusuf Sharif from Tunisia, by the way. I think one of the solutions, just how to make democracy sexy, one of the main things to do is to send everyone who doesn't think that democracy is sexy to an authoritarian place, and they will see how sexy democracy is. That's one. And the other thing, we keep, let's say in this conference and in other conferences like this one, we keep bashing China and Russia and their authoritarian regimes, okay. But then there are a lot of other authoritarian regimes that are actually very close to European countries, to the US, etc. So it's very rare in this kind of places that we see panels discussing human rights violations and threats against democracy in places like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like Egypt, or in places that are considered democracies like Israel, where the Palestinians are actually suffering day and night because of the colonial policies of that country. So I think the second solution on how to make democracy sexy is actually to put the blame on all the violators of human rights and all the enemies of democracy without necessarily following the geopolitical priorities that democracies have. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. I'm going to go across the room. So you've spoken before, so I'm going to give someone else who hasn't spoken a shot first. Watch out.
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel Zubo. I came from Slovakia. I strongly believe that the young generation is kindly asking not only for attention, also for the voice and for the responsibility, for participating on our world. And I believe they should have the right to participate on the democracy. To do it is just to give them the voice also in the parliament, national parliament, European Parliament, which means to change the age which they are allowed to participate on elections. At least 15 years. Thank you.
Let's go across the room to you. That's actually very interesting. You're talking about the young generation participating more, and Elizabeth Warren is talking about breaking up Facebook, but these days, or at least my generation, is young generation participates and actively participates through the internet, through Facebook, through social media. So in some ways we have two separate attempts. Is the young generation then able to go out there and take to the streets and not just be a Facebook activist? I guess that's the question.
Okay, Graziano, my name. I am a press correspondent from Germany and Italy. About Facebook. Facebook started 2004. Do you remember what happened 2003? All newspapers and media of the world shared the same fake news. The weapons that never existed beside the mind of some fools. 1 or 1.5 million deaths because of this lie. I think Facebook may have other problems, but can avoid that the lie can be shared by all the press, because that was something that had never happened before. All the press, there is no single newspapers on the world that didn't share this lie. So I think I don't use Facebook because I don't need it. But I think it's a step forward. It's not the solution, of course. Thank you.
We're going to take one more comment before I come to Tanya Bergera to close out our panel.
Okay.
Thank you. You had your hand up. Someone else who hasn't spoken before?
Sure.
Okay, you haven't spoken before. I'll give you the...
Okay. I just wanted to pick up on what the man over here said about participation. One of the ways to do that is through more deliberative forms in addition to representation. So through citizen assemblies, for instance, because citizens, young citizens like me, are going out on the streets and they are getting their voice heard. It's not the slacktivism which people were fearing there was going to be because of all this Facebook activism and just liking stuff instead of standing up for your rights. So people do want to participate in more formal channels, but don't have the channels to do this formally. So this should be considered.
Okay. We have time for one more comment before we pass it over. So anyone else who hasn't spoken before?
But just to say something on Facebook, I think that the problem is not Facebook. The problem is that Facebook is an image of the world. Now, Mark understands the impact that Facebook has on the world, and he is putting in place an oversight board of 40 people that probably will start before the end of the year to help him or help the company. He's the sole owner of the company, but to help Facebook to, I would say, get a little bit oversight and a neutral view on some of the content that is published on Facebook. But in fact, the platform, it's not the platform that is the problem, it's the fact that it reflects the world. So, and in the platform, we see the world.
Thank you. There was one last comment from the lady at the back there who wanted to speak. Okay, it's going to have to be quick. I know we started late, but I know everyone's also hungry, so catch and...
Thank you. I have two comments. First, I want to share the one that comes with the part on emotional aspects for democracy, and here I think that we need to underline the word appreciation. We need to appreciate what we achieved through the democracy. So when you appreciate, then you really put your efforts to maintain it. And for that, from the perspective of institutionalized aspects, I think that we speak about democracy, but what we are missing as an institutional frame to sustain democracy is justice. We need to put more stress and efforts for justice to overcome all the challenges and possible problems that are kind of undermining democracy. So we build justice to maintain and sustain democratic principles and values. And from that aspect also, I want to comment on the question about Facebook. I don't believe that breaking Facebook into pieces or just breaking it down will kind of offer another alternative for people to speak and to voice whatever they are sharing through the Facebook, but instead what we need to put all these ethical standards to promote democracy through such kind of platforms as Facebook. We need to use this kind of platforms to promote democracy instead of shutting down them or closing them.
Thank you. Okay, we're about to finish our second section. I'm going to hand the mic over to Tania Bruguera, Cuban activist, and she's going to close out the session for us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Tania Bruguera from Cuba, artist and activist. As a conclusion, that's the topic you gave me. I wanted to say many things, but I'm the conclusion. So I just heard a few things very clearly, how fragile democracy is. I heard also that there is a disparity between the ideas of democracy, because many of the concepts that we're using are Eurocentric and US-centric. So sometimes we're making these big generalizations about democracy, and people have different experiences in different countries about what democracy is and what is to be achieved with it. I also heard that we should move from listening to understanding. I think that was very compelling, because we all know what is happening, but how are we engaging with what is happening? What are the actions that we are proposing to make change? I really like when they say that we are talking about what looks good instead of what it should be good. I think that's also, my time is off? No. I also think is very clear, and it talks about all these ways in which we have actually, as citizens, gave up our right and give it to governments in democracies. And we have to be more active as citizens. And I do very much believe in the idea of civic education in order to have a better civic engagement, and in order to have processes of accountability, and also processes where the governments are understanding what the role is for the citizen. I think I just want to say that I agree also with this idea that we have to focus more on justice, because sometimes, yes, democracy is about participation. But what is participation if the result of it is not justice? And I just want to finish with something that really inspired me when Václav Havel said that we need to live in truth. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You know, this whole this discussion was kind of a trial, because when we were thinking about it with Hrishab, we thought, well, it would be nice to have a kind of discussion where more people can be involved. It won't be just, you know, 4 selected speakers talking. And so we came up with the idea of this open forum. We were a little bit afraid that, you know, there will be an awkward silence. So the fact that there wasn't an awkward silence, and then you really participated and were engaged, and not too many people left the room, it's great. So really, thank you very much. I know that there were many different opinions, that you know, we were not able to answer all the questions. We didn't answer the question, you know, how to make democracy sexy again with, you know, specific recommendations, but we did not expect that to happen here. I just should say that I am responsible for the title. Sorry about that. The idea was to make it look good, so people would come, and it worked. So yes, so maybe next time we will come up with some more polite title. But really, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for sharing with us your ideas. See you next year.